It is Friday, January 16th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Ridge Racer episode of LTPS. As per usual, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The January PS Plus monthly games are still live on PSN. Make sure you claim those. And also going into PS Plus Extra and Premium, we have the January lineup revealed as well, going live on the 20th. And so for PS Plus Extra, we have 8 games total. Nothing too crazy, but the obvious standout headline titles are Resident Evil Village and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. So great to have Village right before RE Requiem. Some very opportune timing there. But we also have Expeditions, a Mudrunner game, A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead, Darkest Dungeon 2, The Exit 8, Art of Rally, and A Little to the Left. Now going into PS Plus Premium, we have Ridge Racer PS1, a singular lone PS1 game, which, complaints aside of how it's only one game, and really we used to get 2 or 3 games, and back then that was considered abysmal. But aside from the clear complaint of only one game, and we know why it takes so long, but hey, it is still Ridge Racer, baby. Come on now, put respect on Ridge Racer's name. I saw that and I'm like, okay, well, that's a great one to get. You know, the 3D arcade racer finally coming to a home console and being able to play that 95 September PS1 launch. And there was the standard PS1 console you could buy, or the retail Ridge Racer bundle. And also, come on, the cringiest moment in PlayStation history, or certainly one of them, with our good old friend Kaz up there showing off Ridge Racer on the PSP, saying, "It's Ridge Racer." Remember that one? I certainly do, Kaz. It was not your brightest moment, but it was still one that I hold very dearly in my heart. So, Ridge Racer, I do encourage you all to play that game when it comes to PS4 and PS5 on the 20th. But anyway, moving on to our first news story, we have a new PS5 Power Saver Mode game, and that is God of War Ragnarok, which at the time of recording, I don't know exactly what it's doing just yet. I'll probably boot it up and show you some B-roll, so not sure if it's multiple modes or only one Power Saver mode, but they're probably dramatically lowering resolution, probably maintaining a high frame rate, who knows, but that game does join a very small elite list of games, which is, at this point, 6 total, all SIE titles, whether internal or external developers, but that would be Demon's Souls, Days Gone, Yote, both Death Strandings, and now Ragnarok. Those are the only Power Saver Mode games that we have, and the problem is that if we assume the rumors are true that this Power Saver Mode is meant to facilitate more reliable compatibility on a local play PlayStation handheld down the road, then we're going to need a lot more games, and we would love to see some third-party partners as well finally using it, which was also part of the rumor, and that Sony is likely at this point a bit frustrated that nobody else is really using this. That's why I think maybe at some point they will put in a mandate for publishing partners that, hey, you have to offer a Power Saver mode, because so far, pretty much no one's using it. Outside of SIE titles, which makes sense, anytime Sony has some kind of initiative going on, it's always first-party games that tend to lean and utilize on those things. So, with that said, Ragnarok is a new Power Saver mode game. Now, jumping into one of our bigger news stories from this past week, we have Sony finally addressing the shovelware problem on PSN by removing over 1,000 PS4 and PS5 games from the PlayStation Store, completely delisted, and they all came from a singular publisher, which was Thigh Games DE or Thie Games DE, but they are the ones behind the notorious Jumping games on PSN, and tons of other adjacent similar titles with different names, but the games are all incredibly similar in that they're not even games, not even shovelware. I mean, it's very transactional platinum trophies where you buy the game, is handing out a platinum after 5 to 10 something minutes of gameplay, and I use that in quotations because that's essentially what these things were. And Sony has finally delisted all of them from the store. Now, if you did buy a game previously, you can always re-download it. If you earned a platinum, those things stay to your account. They don't take off platinums or anything like that. They don't unsync trophies in that manner, but they are finally removing these games because the argument we've been saying and talking about for years now at this point is that these games clutter the store. They make it hard for discoverability, whether you're sorting through new releases, maybe you're manually searching for something. Now, I will say in the last 2-ish years, there was a time where Sony was deprioritizing these games on the store, at least from this publisher in particular. We know nowadays you're still going to be finding the bloat on the storefront with other shovelware games and misleading AI slop art titles that are maybe showing screenshots that aren't very realistic to what the core gameplay actually is. There's still a big fundamental problem on PSN with this kind of software, But having said all that, this one was a very egregious example because Thigh Games had over 1,000 titles on PSN. Actually, I thought it was hundreds, but we found out the final metric made them the 4th largest publisher on PSN. So after Sony delisted them, it was 1,194 games total, which is obscene. I cannot believe how many games that was, especially when you hear that number. And that's not inconsequential when we saw from the business segment briefings where Sony shows a slide of how many games are on PSN across PS4 and PS5, and it was 12,000 plus. To remove nearly 1,200 from that number, assuming they were counting these games, it's obscene. It is insane how many titles were on there. So this is a pivotal moment for PlayStation in that we assume, they haven't put out any sort of statement, but we assume they are finally having some quality control and saying, no, we don't want your games on our store. The thing is, there's always been two ways to address this, in that they could go about it in a very Steam, PC, open storefront way. Digital storefronts are not, there's no limited shelf space. They can let anything in theory. Sony kind of already does that. But it's like you just allow everything in, but you algorithmically reward all the proper good experiences and deprioritize the crap. So it's like leave it an open marketplace, let people make money if that's how they want to do transactional platinums, let trophy hunters do what they want to do. If they want to completely min-max it, that's their prerogative, obviously. Some people like to curate their own trophy list. I myself like to do that, right? And we have trophy podium breakdowns. You can see platinums on a profile. You can look into the person's profile, compare trophies, see that all the things they've earned are actually these cheap platinums. And as far as the enthusiast way that you want to see that profile, that's how you can view that person. It's all like everyone is allowed to do whatever they want, technically speaking. So that's one angle to do it. The other angle is very clearly having quality control and curating the store and saying we don't want certain types of experiences on our storefront. The issue does become, as we've said before, or I've argued before, it does become slightly gray of an area, and that, okay, what do you say yes to? What do you say no to? Oh, wait a minute. If you try and automate the process, you might start rejecting games that shouldn't have been rejected. So you do have to draw a line that is very clear and direct, at least in the case of these games. I think the line is pretty clearly drawn because the content was the same in almost every experience, just redressed with assets. They were making the platinums very transactional, so I think there's a very clear argument to be made of why these games should be rejected and no longer allowed on the store. But even in that case, there has to be an appeals process too. There has to be manual human review. You have to give every single developer a chance to appeal and then possibly get rejected again. There just has to be a much better system in place so that the PlayStation Store has good quality content that is served to the right buyers, and in some cases, depending on how you view it, either heavily deprioritize this kind of content or just straight up not allowed on the store to begin with. And I think either option is completely valid, and I'm just happy to see this because, these games, they're just not even games, not even shovelware. Maybe Sony is finally taking this issue seriously before it becomes even more insurmountable than it already has become, because there is still a lot of work to be done on the PlayStation Store as it stands today. All right, moving on to PS5 Pro and a PSSR 2.0 rumor, or PSSR 2.0 as we affectionately like to call it. Now, to clarify right away, this rumor, there's nothing really new here, but this gained a lot of traction. I don't know how. Initially, it started from this one Twitter account, Gust_fan. I guess they've got some traction previously from posting deals and data mining. So this one tweet blew up a lot because they were claiming PSSR 2.0 is coming between now and March. It's going to have similar FSR4 features, improved image quality, boosted frame rates. Low-res classic games will be upscaled, and there will be new debugging tools for developers. So that was the tweet in question. Made headlines. The problem is that we already have very good, well-sourced info on PSSR 2 from PlayStation themselves, Mark Cerny, system architect, directly involved in the Project Amethyst collaboration. So we already know it's coming the first half of this year. It's going to be similar to FSR 4. We had a rumor from Tom from Moore's Law is Dead about the debugging tools for developers. The classic games thing, I guess, is new, but that's so broad and kind of unclear as to what that refers to, like the classic games on PS4, PS5 through PS Plus Premium or PS4 titles. Sony has certainly not talked anything about that, so maybe that's how this got picked up a little bit, but otherwise I wouldn't really put too much weight in it when the other portions of this we already know. That's what some people are still misunderstanding about FSR4, is that is directly from the Project Amethyst collaboration. They've already disclosed this because that's the whole point of that collaboration, is AMD and Sony working on ML convolutional neural networks to produce really good results for their own products and every other product out there, because this is basically a very open collaboration that's meant to benefit the entire industry. But we know FSR4 is a direct result of that collaboration, so anything AMD does, that benefits Sony, and Sony for AMD, vice versa. So we do know that PSSR2 is coming very soon. We just don't know if Sony's going to give it a name or formally announce it much further beyond what Mark Cerny has said. He has described it as a very drop-in solution for developers, so it's not like it's going to be a system-level PSSR thing where you can apply it to games that are not patched or don't have PSSR support. There's still a lot of unknowns, but frankly, we're close enough to where I think we should just wait for when Sony talks more about this, which should not be too far away when we start hearing about PSSR 2 games, if that's what they'll call them. Next up, Sony has published a new blog on the SIE blog about their shared commitment in the online space for player safety, and also their sort of, not quite joint collaboration, but their shared commitment between themselves and Microsoft and Nintendo to lead in this space. And so if you remember back in 2020, Sony released a blog post like this where they were talking about, again, their shared commitment with other platform holders for accountability in the online space. So making sure players are safe with parental controls, adhering to the ESRB and PEGI, and also penalizing players that break their code of conduct, just stuff like that. And so this new blog post is primarily the same stuff, just elaborating on the 3 key points, that being prevention, partnership, and responsibility. So there's really nothing new in there. Sony does say in a very open term or open sense that they're utilizing new technologies to still advance and work on these fields. So there's really nothing else to be said. I mean, all 3 platform holders have been sending out system updates that are offering more parental controls and things like that. So there's really not much here, but if you saw or heard anything about this, that's more or less what this was about. Moving on to a very similar situation that we saw from Meta and Ready at Dawn, the former PlayStation partner developer that did various PSP games, then Order 1886, then acquired, then shut down. So recently Meta has shut down 3 additional studios, that being Armature, Twisted Pixel, and Sanzaru Games. So a Meta spokesperson confirmed that the closures are part of their investment move from the metaverse to wearables like their glasses and their wristbands, which for Sanzaru in particular, they did the Sly Collection. They also made Sly 4 Thieves in Time. They assisted on Secret Agent Clank, and they also led development on Year of the Dragon for the Reignited Trilogy, which that is my favorite Spyro. But Sanzaru, they're somewhat analogous to Ready at Dawn. I mean, Ready at Dawn certainly had a lot more PlayStation projects under their belt versus Sanzaru, but you know, Sanzaru always comes up every so often as that studio that had an alternate timeline out there where maybe they were porting more PlayStation games, maybe they did more Sly Cooper games, which that on its own was very contentious of a topic for the Sly Cooper community, and that there's usually 2 ways of thinking, and that people hate Sly 4 or they genuinely enjoy it and think it's a proper entry in the series. I fall in that camp because it's always a little nerve-wracking, right? When one of your favorite properties goes to a different studio, will they respect the source material, the world building, the plot, the gameplay mechanics? I personally felt like they nailed Sly 4 and it felt like a proper entry, and so there was always the hope and humor of maybe they'll get the chance to go back to PlayStation and do those games again, but they were acquired by Meta and doing various VR projects and now shut down, which sucks because Meta, as a very public company, a massive company no less, that is heavily investing in the AR and VR space, they'll always move on a dime with stuff like this, close down certain initiatives and projects and teams, allocate all that stuff to the new short-term hotness that's going on. They're doing somewhat well with wearables as far as I understand it, so I guess that's what they're doing nowadays, which sucks because then you lose a lot of valuable talent like these studios to where you can't just set them right back up. Sometimes the studio leadership might do that, and maybe we'll get a Ready at Dawn scenario of the leadership doing some confessionals and talking about their history and also what went wrong once they were at Meta. Moving on to From Software and Hidetaka Miyazaki, where he has provided some new comments on Bloodborne for PS4. Now, he did not say anything about a PS5 or PC version. Obviously, everyone would love that, but he did speak a little bit about the game when recently talking with Game Informer, where he did touch on how Bloodborne is a very special game to him. He called it probably the most challenging development cycle the studio ever had, and that he put so much of himself into the game, a lot of his own ideas from the story, the world building, and the game mechanics, and that it's perhaps the strongest reflection of his type of flavoring of a game that one can experience. So it's one of those things where it really telegraphs just how deeply personal this game means to him on that fundamental level, even after putting out things like Elden Ring or any other really From Software title at this point, right? Because Bloodborne's over 10 years old now, which is insane to think about. But it seems like it's a very important game to him, which is the same echoed statement from Shuhei Yoshida on why has this game not gone anywhere just yet, and he suspects that Sony is just respecting the source material and the creator and that they don't want to touch the game, because that's the argument we always make, is that yes, it is a Sony-owned IP. We know this as a fact. They could, in theory, do whatever they want with it, but it might simply be an actual respect thing of if they're not doing it, if From Software is not available to work on the property, then they're not going to let anybody else do it. Or it could also be a contractual thing, which as more time passes, it seems like that may be the case of a unique contract, which they come in all different shapes and sizes. You know, we saw the Death Stranding one where Sony owned the IP for 5 years, and then it went right back to Hideo Kojima day of, which we don't know that until something happens. So whatever sort of unique contract may be in place for this game, there might be a right of refusal where they have to approve, From Software in this case, has to approve anything done with that property. That's speculation, of course, but it's something that might make sense in the here and now for why we don't have anything on PS5 or PC. Having said that, it does make sense that Hidetaka Miyazaki does love this game a lot. He has always made that very clear. Let's move on to some third-party news stories, beginning with Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, which is coming out very soon on the 22nd for Xbox Series S, X, and Nintendo Switch 2. And with those games in particular, we know they're getting some new quality of life, like sort of story-level progression features. So things like having max HP and MP, always dealing 9,999 damage, and then having the max number of items available. We did learn that's coming to PS5. Now we have confirmation. The patch for PS5 will be available day and date, so you're not missing out on anything. If you do want to play the game that way, not only is it a great accessibility option, but it might also be a great way to just do a second or third playthrough if you want to really gold path it and not be bogged down by the challenge or monotony of certain encounters and things like that. So it's always great when you have those toggles because it really does make a gold path playthrough much more easy. Now, as for the Xbox Game Studios side of things, we do know that we're getting that Developer Direct very soon on the 20th, which is going to showcase Fable, Forza Horizon 6, and Battles of Reincarnation, and potentially a fourth mystery game. But with Fable, we were discussing last week that that game technically does not have a PS5 version just yet, although we very safely assume one is coming. Well, that's the new rumor, is that yes, it is coming, potentially day and date. So this initially came from Andy Robinson of VGC, where they discussed this on the podcast, and they said very openly that the game is targeting PS5. It has been for some time, so he actually expects it to be available on PS5 day one, given the time that Playground has been working on it, which cannot be said for Forza Horizon 6, so that's why that game has a bit of a time delta, and that's a good segue to our next story in that we now have the release date for that game because it showed up as an in-game pop-up in Forza Horizon 5, confirming a May 19th release. There's also going to be a premium edition that is coming out on the 15th if you want to pay more money, and then you'll get a welcome pass, car pass, 2 premium expansions, things like that, but that'll be Xbox PC May 19th. And at least the good news there is that May 19th is not too far away, so that in theory means we could see the PS5 version come out before this year is over. So just based on how much time they might be far away from the PS5 version, having the Xbox and PC one shipping in May means it can't be that far away, which is definitely good to hear. Now, as for Ninja Theory, the developer behind the Hellblade games, we also had a rumor from Jez Corden of Windows Central speaking on the Xbox 2 podcast, where he openly said that they are working on a new Hellblade game. He's not sure if it's Hellblade 3 or titled something else, but it should be in the Hellblade universe. And he does clarify that this game should focus more on interactive gameplay as a way to broaden the appeal of it, because with Senua's Saga, of course, it was very hyper cinematic, more light on the gameplay department, which a lot of players didn't really enjoy. And he also mentioned that for Project Mara, which that was announced over 6 years ago for those that don't remember, but that was another project at Ninja Theory, which was meant to be a very experimental, interactive thing that they put out there. He said they're not working on that right now actively. That's been put down, which in light of Microsoft's pretty aggressive profit targets and shutting down studios or certain internal projects, you have to consider that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that Ninja Theory is probably in a position of, we can't do this experimental, risky thing, and also our next game has to really broaden its appeal and maybe be more gameplay focused, which that seems about right to me. Haven't played Senua's Saga yet. I don't mind the cinematic, crazy, gorgeous looking games. I actually really enjoy those because they complement everything else that's been going on nowadays. But for some, yeah, I can see how you don't really like that experience. But Hellblade 1 was a lot of fun, so I'll be curious to see what they do for the third game, no doubt. Next up, we have more speculation going on in the Persona 30th anniversary landscape, which this one is perhaps the most encouraging. Now, the 30th anniversary, again, is going to be the whole year of a celebration, even though it is going to go past the actual anniversary date, so there's always going to be announcements for merchandise and product updates for the Persona franchise. They do so many things, obviously, but over on X, this was spotted by Scrambled Faz, where the Google results for the Asia site of the 30th anniversary site, that has a small text descriptor where it says, quote, "Come celebrate the journey as we usher in the next chapter of the series," end quote. So that's the only way that line of text shows up, is the Asia site on Google search results. That still is baked into the site, obviously, so that's very good. It's still speculation, but perhaps this will be the year at some point where they will showcase, reveal, or even do a slight teaser for the next mainline entry, which we are certainly overdue for, of course. Even though Persona 4, the revival, we still need to see like substantial footage of that too, because they announced it very early. So I'm not sure how far along 6 is, but I just hope that theme color green is something that we will see very soon, since that's what we're hearing. Moving on to some pretty crazy video game business tea, which has once again showed up from a court filing, and this one is from none other than the former Activision CEO, Bobby Kotick, where there was a recent lawsuit filed in, well, late 2022 from the Swedish pension fund AP7, where they were alleging that Bobby Kotick rushed the Activision Blizzard sale and he sold it for less per share than it was worth to avoid the consequences of sexual misconduct allegations. But a new court filing submitted by Kotick recently, this was back in December from their lawyers and has now been made public. He says the plaintiff should be thankful he sold when he did. He said, quote, "Today, given that console sales are at an all-time low and Call of Duty sales are off over 60% from the prior year, plaintiff should be expressing extreme gratitude for the foresight Activision leadership demonstrated in consummating this transaction. Call of Duty is on track to perform over 60% below last year because of intense competition from titles like Battlefield, destroying the FTC's now defeated argument about Call of Duty's purported monopoly and the lack of competition in the first-person action game category." Now, he also went on to blame Embracer Group as a potential collaborator behind the suit, as they could benefit from the reduced competition, which Embracer has denied this entirely when they were asked by Stephen Totilo for his newsletter Game File. But crazy words there. Now, the thing about the court filings and responding in this manner, it's always going to be very cutthroat, and they're going to make arguments that might be in bad faith, or very clearly they have to defend themselves in every conceivable way. You can't, allow yourself any sort of wiggle room for them to make a counter argument. So he's going to be saying things that are just straight up in bad faith. But the headlines are definitely being drafted over the 60% year down for Call of Duty, which we don't have any sort of firm metrics, of course, because if a game is doing bad, if any company has bad numbers, they're not going to outline that exactly. They'll usually obfuscate those numbers, so we don't have an exact percentage per se. But also the console sales thing has been picking up a lot of traction, which he's not necessarily wrong, but it's, again, one of those things where it's a very broad, open statement that is left for interpretation when you dial in specific platform performance data, that's not accurate at all. Obviously, like one guy, Xbox, is doing very bad historically. We had 1 November recently in the US where, yes, we did see historic lows since 1995, 1 month. In some cases, you can look at Nintendo numbers for Switch 2, where if you combine it with Switch 1 sales, in certain cases it's not matching the Switch 1 December sales performance or something like that from 2024. But like, that's the other weird thing about Switch 2. It's doing incredibly well on a launch line basis. It's just, it was very heavily front-loaded because there was a lot of consoles actually available at launch, right? So it still remains to be seen how well Switch 2 will do long term, even though there's still a lot of uncertainty in the here and now from, investors and shareholders. That's the thing with these markets. They're always so highly speculative, and they freak out over any sort of bad news that's going on. But, that was a big headline. So the thing about Bobby Kotick is that, like, they're going to be making these kind of bad faith arguments to defend themselves when we all know why you sold when you did, and there's really no excusing or getting around that. There was so much pressure, and realistically, when you have a buyer lined up, a lot of these CEOs and the board and the investors, they will rush to make that sale, whether there is some pressure to see a leadership change or not. Moving on to some Ubisoft news, which generally there's not good news going on with Ubisoft, whenever we talk about it at least, and that's what's going on within 2 weeks of 2026, because there has been a lot of layoffs going on. So recently they laid off 55 employees across 2 studios, so some from Ubisoft Stockholm and then more from Massive Entertainment, who they are working on The Division 3. And also the week before that, Ubisoft Halifax, their mobile team, that was shut down, so that was another 70 staff members let go, just as they formed a union, no less. And then the weird thing is that back in December, they are still spending and restructuring. They acquired March of Giants, that MOBA from Amazon Game Studios, and they inadvertently rehired former Ubisoft Montreal team members. And they've got things in the pipeline very soon, like the Prince of Persia remake, the Black Flag 4 remaster, the Division 3 is coming. So there is stuff on the way, especially with, again, all the restructuring going on with the Ubisoft, or the Tencent managed subsidiary of the popular Ubisoft properties, and that's Vantage Studios now. It's just a lot of staving off, not quite the inevitable, but they're just not in a great spot financially, and they've been on a downward trend for quite a long time. And some of their games are good. They're still performing very well. The problem is that they just need more hits. There's only so many times you can release an Assassin's Creed game, and it might do very well, but you need more. You can't prop up the entire business off a handful of properties, but that's part of all this restructuring, is staving off what has been an issue for the Guillemot family for quite a long time now. Next up, we have some words from Joseph Fares, the founder of Hazelight Studios, the team responsible for the multiplayer and couch co-op encouraged games A Way Out, It Takes Two, and Split Fiction. So he was speaking with Christopher Dring of The Game Business, talking about the recent sales performance of It Takes Two. They've crossed over 27 million copies sold, which is nuts. Split Fiction is also doing very well, but they were speaking more directly on trends in the games business, AA games, AAA games. He said, quote, "You do hear, after the success of things like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, that the AA games are taking over, but I would not be able to live without a AAA title. I really want to play the blockbuster games. You can't do GTA for $10 million. We need both. It's important not to get stuck on ideas, like AA is a new thing, or Indies is a new thing, or blah 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 is a new thing. We need the diversity. I hope that publishers don't just look at a game like Expedition, which has been super successful, and think, oh, AA is a new thing, let's only do that. I don't believe in that. You had a huge amount of AA games that came out last year, which nobody cared about. Let's remember that." Now, he also touched on various other topics, like how they want to stay private and not go public. Great news there. I love his attitude on that. He also spoke about generative AI, how it's something they could look into, but the future is uncertain, so he didn't really give a super concrete answer on that. And they're also well into their next game, which Joseph believes is better than Split Fiction. which he is always a very charismatic, outspoken person, and he always loves hyping up their own products, rightfully so. So he is always going to speak like that, but he is a very brash, open person, so whenever he speaks, I always love paying attention to it, and I completely agree. He makes great points. This industry does oftentimes really chase trends a lot. The thing is, there are so many developers and publishers, and there's so many games coming out that there usually is a lot to go around, but that is the thing. I mean, trends do still happen. That's why we're in this boat of a lot of folks being really over the amount of roguelikes we're getting or all the Souls games, but that's the other issue with chasing trends in the games business, where you can't spend 3, 4, 5, 7 years making a game, and by the time it comes out, trends have changed. You have to try something new and different, be experimental, and then by the time you come out, it might actually be something players are ready to play and engage with. And so it's great to have a different scale of genres, budgets, and scope. And it's cool to have him from a private studio staying private, that's something they firmly believe in. Moving on to Remedy and Control Resonant, the sequel to the 2019 Control, where they've given a very small statement about what they're doing with this game. And so they do say on X that this is the biggest and most ambitious game they've ever made, and that it's not a safe sequel. They want to push boundaries of what they can do. Which, hey, a publisher saying really cool, crazy things about the experience they're making. At the very least, though, the trailer does show something very different. Not sure if it's the biggest and most ambitious, but that is the thing about sequels, you know? Sometimes they're really safe by the books, and that's good because you know what you're getting into, and you just want more of that game and that experience and that world building. In some cases, they do get very experimental. You know, Control was a linear third-person shooter. Now it's going to be open, focusing on melee combat. Even I was like, ooh, interesting. I don't know if I'm going to love that in the same way I loved the 2019 Control. But I don't want that to be a deterrent from, you know, bigger publishers doing risks like that. So I'm still all for it. I'll be ready to play Resonant when it comes out, and I'm glad that they are trying something very different. Let's get into our next major Gen AI controversy going on in the games business. This time it is Cygames, the developer behind the Grand Blue Fantasy series and many other games, where they recently announced they have established a new subsidiary where it's AI research and development, so a whole AI studio. Naturally, there was a lot of pushback from that announcement, and so they've now published a new statement addressing the criticism by saying that they failed to address any of the current social debates surrounding Gen AI, and they do apologize for that. They then state no art produced by Gen AI is used in their products, and they won't implement Gen AI without prior notice. Now, again, for clarity's sake, the Cygames AI studio is for research and development, which has been the running theme with Gen AI in game development, is that nobody really has this figured out yet on what's the best path to utilize it and cut down development time or to cut down labor costs. I mean, it's still very much a babysitting kind of thing where you prompt and prompt again and prompt again. That's still a human doing that. So like that's the, again, weird thing about how it's being utilized right now. It's really not saving any time or efficiency. Every studio is trying to find it. And so this is another studio that's openly saying that's what we're looking to do. And their message is also very clear and deliberate in that they said they don't use any Gen AI games in their products. It's like a current statement, not that they won't do it down the road. And they're saying that they will disclose it when that does eventually come up, which here's the thing. If you are, staunchly against it, this is at least what you want to, in the sense that you are given agency on upholding your own values. So the argument I'm always going to make here is that at the very minimum, the disclosures help a lot to make you be able to choose what to buy and what not to buy. You know what I'm saying? If everyone's using Gen AI and not disclosing it, it's going to be very hard to uphold values in this hobby, right? Because there is going to be a very set of boutique publishers and developers that maybe that's their stance, is that they won't touch it. And they really do believe in the creative human touch, and they'll always develop games without Gen AI. There's already some that are making that statement right now. That's great, and you can always buy their games at that point. The ones that are using it, it's good to have them at least openly say, we are exploring it, we are using it. And it's even better if they get into the finite details of, we're using it and here's how we're doing it, and it's not art. And so if you're more in the middle on this topic of I really don't want it to be art produced by Gen AI or this, that, and the fourth, right? The more that is out there and is openly discussed, the better informed you are about how you'll feel and what you care about and value most on this topic. Moving on to some major PlayStation Productions news, which is the God of War Amazon TV series now has its Kratos in Ryan Hurst, who played Opie in Sons of Anarchy, and then Beta in The Walking Dead, and they appeared in so much other things for TV and film, but Ryan Hurst more well known for playing Thor in God of War Ragnarok, and so he will be playing Kratos in the live-action adaptation. And I'll tell you, I think it's a fine choice. Ryan Hurst has played in-universe, and he's got the voice for it. I mean, the thing is, I think for a lot of people, it was definitely a matter of getting somebody big and bulky and sort of has that frame that Kratos has. And Ryan Hurst seems like he could certainly fit that bill if he bulks up even more. I mean, there's definitely a lot of regimens to where somebody can do that. Of course, there's CGI if they want to go crazy with that, but that can be a little bit uneven and look not good depending on the kind of budget they give the show. But there's prosthetics and practical. I mean, there's ways to make this guy look like Kratos. You know what I'm saying? The voice, though, I think is a very particular voice in that it's very harsh, low, and monotone. And again, like he's actually played in the universe, so I think it could have been so much worse, right? When it comes to polarizing casting choices, I think Ryan Hurst is a great pick, actually. So sign me up. I think it's going to be good. And I still get the complaints of, oh, it's only the Norse era, and you're skipping out on this major backstory with Kratos. But again, like the issue with that is, like, that's where those games were like 99% gameplay. There's just no depth to the character and the story. Don't get me wrong, it's an important part of Kratos for his character and his story, but, contextually, we can't ignore the fact that they were very hack and slash video gamey games on PS2, PSP, PS3, very light on storytelling and any sort of meaningful character development, and they really were able to accomplish that on the PS4 entries in the Norse era. So that is the story that you start telling from that point on, and then you just do heavy exposition dumps from his Greek era if you can do that. I mean, I guess the only other sort of counterpoint would be, like, yeah, that was the issue with the Greek games, and so you can do that and rectify that with a live-action adaptation, but I don't know, I think that's kind of hard to do, and at that point, he wouldn't feel like Kratos if he's doing all this narrative, talking and speaking, and I don't like that. Just it doesn't really work, right? I think it's fine if you sort of skip over the Greek era and just spend some time explaining the deal he made with Ares and all the other crazy things that he's gone through. But with Ryan Hurst now taking on Kratos, I think this it bodes pretty well. Now I'm curious who the rest of the cast members are going to be, though. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X. And if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. You can follow the link down below or scan the QR code and enter the Gleam giveaway. And supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was looking at my top 10 rarest platinum trophies ranked by PSN profiles. If you enjoyed that conversation, we can certainly reset the filters and change it to top 10 rarest trophies, no platinums, things like that. So if you want more trophy discussion videos, then we can certainly do that. But that was Tuesday, and then we have Click R3 coming up next week. And that, folks, is about it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.